For Your Eyes Only by Ian Fleming. Read by Rufus Sewell. The Hildebrandt Rarity. The stingray was about 6 feet from wing-tip to wing-tip, and perhaps 10 feet long from the blunt wedge of its nose to the end of its deadly tail. It was dark grey, with that violet tinge that is so often a danger signal in the underwater world. When it rose up from the pale golden sand and swam a little distance, it was as if a black towel was being waved through the water. James Bond, his hands along his flanks and swimming with only a soft trudge of his fins, followed the black shadow across the palm-fringed lagoon, waiting for a shot. He rarely killed fish except to eat, but there were exceptions. He proposed to kill the stingray because it looked so extraordinarily evil. It was 10 o'clock in the morning of a day in April, and the lagoon in the Seychelles was glassy calm. The temperature was 80 in the shade and the humidity 90. Even the fish seemed to be sluggish. A 10-pound green parrotfish, nibbling algae from a lump of coral, paused only to roll its eyes as Bond passed, then went back to its meal. In about 12 feet of water the ray stopped. Bond stopped also and emptied water out of his goggles. By the time he looked again, the ray had disappeared. Bond had a champion harpoon gun with double rubbers, a short-range weapon, but the best for reef work. He pushed up the safe and moved slowly forward. The sand stretched away into the smoky wings like the bare boards of a stage. Now Bond could see the faint outline on the bottom. He swam directly over it and lay motionless on the surface looking down. There was a movement. 2 minute fountains of sand were dancing above the nostril-like holes of the spiracles. Behind the holes was the slight swelling of the thing's body. That was the target. Bond reached his gun down and pulled the trigger. Below him the sand erupted. Then the harpoon line came taut and the ray showed, pulling away from him while its tail lashed again and again over the body. At the base of the tail Bond could see the jagged poison spines standing up from the trunk. One scratch from the ray's sting would mean certain death. Cautiously, keeping the ray on a taut line, Bond trudged after the furiously wrestling fish. He swam to one side to keep the line away from the lashing tail. This tail was the old slave-driver's whip of the Indian Ocean. Today it is illegal even to possess one in the Seychelles, but they are handed down in the families for use on faithless wives. Now the lashes of the tail were getting weaker, and Bond swam round and ahead of the ray and pulled it up on the beach. But he still kept away from it. It was as well he did so. Suddenly the giant ray leapt clean into the air and fell on its back with its white underbelly to the sun and the great ugly sickle of the mouth sucking and panting. A short, fat white man in khaki shirt and trousers came out from under the palm trees and called out in a laughing voice, "The old man in the sea! Who caught who?" Bond turned. It would be the only man on the island who doesn't carry a machete. "Fidel, be a good chap and call one of your men. This animal won't die. He's got my spear stuck in him." Fidel Barbet, the youngest of the innumerable Barbets who own nearly everything in the Seychelles, came up and stood looking down at the ray. "That's a good one. But come on, something's come up. Something good. I'll send one of my men for the gun. Do you want the tail?" Bond smiled. "I haven't got a wife, but what about some ray au beurre noir tonight?" "Not tonight, my friend. Come, where are your clothes?" On their way down the coast road in the station wagon, Fidel said, "Ever hear of an American called Milton Crest? Apparently he owns the Crest Hotels and a thing called the Crest Foundation. One thing I can tell you for sure, he owns the finest damned yacht in the Indian Ocean. Put in yesterday, the Wave Crest. 100 feet long. Everything, you know, from a beautiful wife down to a big transistor gramophone on gimbal so the waves won't jerk the needle." Fidel Barbet laughed delightedly. "And if Mr. Crest is a grand slam redoubled in bastards, who the hell cares?" "Who cares anyway? What's it got to do with you, or me?" "Just this, my friend. We are going to spend a few days sailing with Mr. Crest. I have agreed to take the ship to Chagrin. This man's collecting marine specimens, and there's some blasted little fish that's supposed to exist only around Chagrin Island." "Sounds rather fun. Where do I come in?" I knew you were bored, so I said that you were the local underwater ace, and that you'd soon find the fish if it was there, and that's that. It had been nearly a month before when M had told Bond he was sending him to the Seychelles. Admiralty are having trouble with their new fleet base in the Maldives. Communists creeping in from Ceylon may have to fall back on the Seychelles. Just go and have a look. M glanced out of the window at the driving March sleet. Don't get sunstroke. Bond's report, which concluded that the only security hazard lay in the beauty of the Seychellois, had been finished a week before, and then he had nothing to do but wait for the SS Kampala to take him to Mombasa. The prospect of a change delighted him. The gleaming white yacht lay a half-mile out. They took a pirogue with an outboard motor across the glassy bay and through the opening in the reef. The wave crest seemed deserted, but as they came alongside, two smart-looking sailors in white shorts appeared. They took the bags, and one of them slid back an aluminium hatch and gestured for them to go down. A breath of almost freezing air struck Bond as he went through and into the lounge. The lounge was empty. It was not a cabin. It was a room of solid richness. The windows were full size, as were the armchairs. The carpet was the deepest pile in pale blue. There was a desk with writing materials and a telephone. Next to the big gramophone was a sideboard laden with drinks. Above the sideboard was what looked like a Renoir. The impression of a luxurious living room in a townhouse was completed by a bowl of white and blue hyacinths on the central table. Bond shook his head admiringly. This is certainly the way to treat the sea, as if it damn well didn't exist. He breathed in deeply. What a relief to get a mouthful of fresh air. It's the stuff outside that's fresh, fella. This is canned. Mr. Milton Crest had come into the room and was standing looking at them. He was a leathery man in his early 50s. He looked hard and fit, and the faded blue jeans, military-cut shirt, and wide leather belt suggested that he made a fetish of doing so. The pale brown eyes were slightly hooded. The mouth had a downward twist, and the words he had tossed into the room had been tossed like small coin to a couple of coolies. To Bond, the oddest thing about Mr. Crest was his voice. It was exactly the voice of the late Humphrey Bogart. Bond thought, this man likes to be thought a Hemingway hero. I'm not going to get on with him. Mr. Crest came across the carpet and held out his hand. You, Bond? Glad to have you aboard, sir. Free diving or aqualung? Free, and I don't go deep. It's only a hobby. What do you do the rest of the time? Civil servant. Mr. Crest gave a short, barking laugh. Civility and servitude. You English make the best goddamn butlers and valets in the world. I reckon we're likely to get along. The click of the deck hatch saved Bond's temper. Mr. Crest was swept from his mind as a naked, sunburnt girl came down the steps into the saloon. No, she wasn't quite naked, after all, but the pale brown satin scraps of bikini were designed to make one think she was. Hello, treasure. Where you been hiding? Meet Mr. Bobby and Mr. Bond. Mr. Crest raised a hand in the direction of the girl. Fellas, this is Mrs. Crest, the 5th Mrs. Crest. And just in case anybody should get any ideas, she loves Mr. Crest. Don't you, treasure? Oh, don't be silly, Milt. You know I do. Mrs. Crest smiled prettily. How do you do? It's nice to have you with us. What about a drink? Now, just a minute, Trez. Suppose you let me fix things aboard my own ship, huh? The woman blushed. Oh, yes, Milt, of course. Okay, then. Just so we know who's skipper. The smile embraced them all. Now then, Mr. Barbet. Fidel. That's quite a name. Old Faithful. Well now, Fido, how's about you and me go up on the bridge and get this old skiff moving, huh? And Mr. Bond? James. Well, Jim, what say you practice a bit of that civility and servitude on Mrs. Crest? Call her Liz, by the way. Help her fix the canapes for drinks before lunch. She was once a limey, too. You can swap yarns about Piccadilly Circus and the Dukes you both know, okay? Move, Fido. He sprang boyishly up the steps. When the hatch closed, Mrs. Crest said apologetically, "He likes to see if he can rile people, but it's really all in fun." Bond smiled reassuringly. "I expect your husband needs a bit of knowing. How long have you been married?" 2 years. I was working as a receptionist in one of his hotels. It was wonderful, like a fairy story. This, for instance." She waved a hand at the luxurious room. "And he's always giving me presents. But I really must go and get some clothes on." There came a deep rumble from below deck amidships. "There, we're off. Why don't you watch us leave harbour, and I'll come and join you in a minute. This way." She slid open a door. "As a matter of fact, if you're sensible, you'll stake a claim to this for the nights. The cabins are apt to get a bit stuffy in spite of the air conditioning." Bond thanked her. It was a big well deck with a foam rubber settee in the stern. Bond watched the green flanks of Mahe slip slowly away and idly thought about the beautiful Mrs. Elizabeth Crest. She could have been a model, but there was none of the chill of the model about her. It was a warm body and a friendly, confiding face. And her prettiness, for it was not more than that, was still immature. Her best feature was the ash-blonde hair that hung heavily to the base of her neck. She seemed pleasantly lacking in vanity. "Well, fella, taking it easy?" Mr. Crest was standing on the boat deck, looking down into the well. "What have you done with that woman I live with? Left her to do all the work? Well, and why not? That's what they're for, ain't it? Care to look over the ship? Fido's doing a spell at the wheel, and I got time on my hands." Mr. Crest lowered himself down into the well deck. "Mrs. Crest's putting on some clothes." "Yes, I'd like to see over the ship." Mr. Crest fixed Bond with his hard, disdainful stare. "Facts first. It's built by the Bronson Shipbuilding Corporation. I happen to own 90% of the stock, so I got what I wanted. Right? Now let's go up front and we'll work back. And one thing, Jim." Mr. Crest stamped on the deck. "This is the floor, see? And the head's the can. And if I want someone to stop doing whatever they're doing, I don't shout, 'Belay,' I shout, 'Hold it.' Get me, Jim?" Bond nodded amiably. "She's your ship." "It's my ship," corrected Mr. Crest. "That's another bit of damn nonsense, making a hunk of steel and wood a female. Let's go." Bond followed Mr. Crest, and for half an hour made appropriate comments on what was certainly the most luxuriously designed yacht he had ever seen. In every detail the margin was for extra comfort. The stainless steel galley, or kitchen, as Mr. Crest called it, was as big as the Crest stateroom. Mr. Crest opened the door of the latter without knocking. Liz Crest was at the dressing-table. "Why, Treasure, I reckon you be out there fixing a drink tray. You sure been one heck of a time. Putting on a little extra rich for Jim, eh?" "I'm sorry, Milt. The zip got stuck." The girl gave them both a nervous half-smile and went out. "Vermont birch paneling, Corning glass lamps." Mr. Crest's catalogue ran smoothly on, but Bond was looking at something that hung down on Mr. Crest's side of the huge double bed. It was a thin whip about 3 feet long with a leather-thonged handle. It was the tail of a stingray. Casually, Bond walked over and ran a finger down its spiny gristle. It hurt his finger even to do that. He said, "Where did you pick that up?" "Bahrain. The Arabs use 'em on their wives." Mr. Crest chuckled. "Haven't had to use more than one stroke at a time on Liz so far. Wonderful results. We call it my corrector." Bond looked hard at Mr. Crest and said, "Is that so?" Mr. Crest moved towards the door. "Let's go get ourselves something to drink." Mr. Crest drank 3 double bullshots before luncheon, and beer with the meal. The pale eyes darkened, but the voice remained soft and unemphatic as, with a complete monopoly of the conversation, he explained the object of the voyage. "You see, fellas, in the States we have this system for the lucky guys that got plenty dough and don't happen to want to pay it to Uncle Sam's treasury. You make a foundation for charitable purposes. You give the money away to anyone or anything except yourself, and you escape tax on it. So I put a matter of $10 million into the Crest Foundation, And since I happen to like yachting, I bought this yacht with $2 million of the money and told the Smithsonian, that's our big natural history institution, that I would collect specimens for them. So that makes me a scientific expedition, see? For 3 months of every year I have a fine holiday that costs me just sweet fatty Arbuckle." Mr. Crest looked at his guests for applause. Fidel Barbet shook his head. "That sounds fine, Mr. Crest, but these rare specimens, they are easy to find? The Smithsonian, it wants a giant panda, a seashell. You can get hold of these things where they have failed?" Mr. Crest said sorrowfully, "Fella, you sure were born yesterday. Money, that's all it takes. You want a panda? You buy it from some goddamn zoo that can't afford central heating for its reptile house. The seashell, you find a man that's got one, and you offer him so much goddamn money that even if he cries for a week, he sells it to you." Bond said, "You'll probably get a medal when you get home. What about this fish?" Mr. Crest rummaged in a drawer of his desk. He brought back a typewritten sheet. "Hildebrandt Rarity. Caught by Professor Hildebrandt off Chagrin Island, April 1925. The only specimen known is 6 inches long. The color is a bright pink with black transverse stripes. The anal, ventral, and dorsal fins are pink. The tail fin is black. Eyes large and dark blue. If found, care should be taken in handling because all fins are sharply spiked." Mr. Crest threw the paper on the table. "Well, there you are, fellas. We're traveling 1,000 miles to try to find a goddamn 6-inch fish, and the revenue people had the gall to suggest that my foundation was a phony." Liz Crest broke in eagerly. "But that's just it, Milt, isn't it? It's really rather important to bring back plenty of specimens this time. Weren't those horrible tax people talking about disallowing the yacht and the expenses for the last 5 years if we didn't show an outstanding scientific achievement?" "Treasure." Mr. Crest's voice was as soft as velvet. "Just supposing you keep that flippin' trap shut about my personal affairs, yes? You know what you just done, Trez? You just earned yourself a little meeting with a corrector this evening." The girl's hand flew to her mouth. She said in a whisper, "Oh no, Milt, please." On the second day out, at dawn, they came up with Chagrin Island. Bond stood in the bows and watched the flying fish squirt from beneath the hull as the blue-black of the sea slowly mottled into the brown and white and green of deep shoal. How wonderful that he would soon be walking and swimming again instead of just sitting and lying down. How wonderful to have a few hours' solitude, a few hours away from Mr. Milton Crest. Chagrin was the prototype coral island, 20 acres of sand surrounded by a necklace of reef on which the swell broke with a soft hiss. Clouds of birds rose when they landed, terns, boobies, men of war, but quickly settled again. Mr. Crest ordered a tent to be erected and sat in it smoking, while Bond and Fidel Barbet put on masks and began systematically to comb the reef with only one picture in mind, a 6-inch pink fish with black stripes and big eyes. "If you see it," Mr. Crest had enjoined, "just you let out a yell and stay with it. I'll do the rest." Bond moved slowly, his mind considering the girl. She had spent the previous day in bed. Would she one day get herself a knife or a gun, and, when he reached for that damnable whip, would she kill him? No. She was too soft, too malleable. Mr. Crest had chosen well. Bond put the Crests out of his mind. Fidel Barbet's snorkel was only 100 yards away. They came up with each other and swam to the shore. Mr. Crest heard their voices and came to meet them. "No dice, eh? Here, give me one of those masks. I guess I might as well take a peek at the sea's bottom while I'm about it." They sat in at the hot tent and ate chicken salad and drank beer, and moodily watched Mr. Crest poking about in the shallows. 50 yards away, he began to make frantic signals. Bond said, "Either the bastard's found it, or he's trodden on a guitar-fish," and picked up his mask and ran down to the sea. Mr. Crest was standing up to his waist among the shallow beginnings of the reef. He jabbed his finger excitedly at the surface. Bond swam forward. A carpet of seagrass ended in broken coral. A small langoust quested towards Bond with its feelers. The head of a green moray protruded from a hole. Bond stopped and floated, his eyes scanning the brilliant jungle. A red blur materialized through the far mist. It circled closely beneath him as if showing itself off. The dark blue eyes examined him without fear. The small fish made a dart at a speck of something suspended in the water, and then, as if leaving the stage after showing its paces, swam languidly back into the mist. Bond pulled off his mask. Yes, that's it all right. Better move quietly away from here. He won't go away unless he's frightened. These reef fish stick pretty well to the same pastures. Fidel Barbet was waiting for them. Mr. Crest said boisterously, "Fido, I found that goddamn fish. Me, Milton Crest. After you two goddamn experts had been at it all morning, I walked out and found it in 15 minutes flat. What do you say to that, eh?" "That's good, Mr. Crest. That's fine. Now how do we catch it?" "Aha!" Mr. Crest winked slowly. "I got just the ticket for that. Stuff called rotenone. Just pour it in the water, where it'll float over what you're after, and it'll get 'em sure as eggs is eggs. Constricts the blood vessels in their gills, suffocates 'em. No effect on humans because no gills, see?" Mr. Crest turned to Bond. "Here, Jim, you go on out and keep watch. See the darn fish don't vamoose." Bond swam lazily out to where he had stood before. Yes, everyone was still there. The Murray's pointed head was back again at the edge of its hole. The langoust again queried him. In a minute, as if it had a rendezvous with Bond, the Hildebrandt Rarity appeared. This time it swam up quite close to his face. It looked through the glass at his eyes, and then, as if disturbed by what it had seen there, darted out of range. It played around among the rocks for a while, and then went off into a mist. Slowly, the little underwater world began to take Bond for granted. Some very small fish, like minnows, nibbled at his legs and toes, tickling. Bond broke a sea egg for them, and they darted to the better meal. Bond lifted his head. Mr. Crest, holding the flat can, was about 20 yards away. He would begin pouring when Bond gave the sign. "Okay?" called Mr. Crest. Bond shook his head. "I'll raise my thumb when he's back here." "Okay, Jim. You are at the bomb site." Bond put his head down. There was the little community. Everyone busied with his affairs. Soon, to get one fish that someone vaguely wanted in a museum 5,000 miles away, 100, perhaps 1,000 small people were going to die. When Bond gave the signal, the shadow of death would come down on the stream. How long would the poison last? How far would it travel? A small trunkfish appeared, its tiny fins whirring like propellers. A rock beauty, gorgeous in gold and red and black, pecked at the sand. Now a predator was waiting, to kill, almost for fun. 2 brown legs appeared. Bond looked up. It was Fidel Barbet, with a big creel strapped to his chest and a long-handled landing net. Bond lifted his mask. "I feel like the bomb aimer at Nagasaki." Barbet said, "What's eating you? They're only fish." I know. Fidel Barbet had spent his life killing animals and fish, while he, Bond, had sometimes not hesitated to kill men. What was he fussing about? He hadn't minded killing the stingray. Yes, but that was an enemy fish. These down here were friendly people. People? "Hey!" came the voice of Mr. Crest. "What's going on over there?" Bond pulled down his mask and lay again on the surface. At once he saw the beautiful red shadow coming out from the far mists. The fish swam fast up to him as if it now took him for granted. It lay below him, looking up. Bond said into his mask, "Get away from here, damn you." He gave a sharp jab at the fish with his harpoon. The fish fled back into the mist. Bond lifted his head and angrily raised his thumb. It was a ridiculous and petty act of sabotage. The dark, oily liquid was pouring out onto the surface of the lagoon. Bond stood and watched until the last drop was tilted out. To hell with Mr. Crest. Now the stuff was creeping slowly down on the current, a shiny, spreading stain. Mr. Crest was wading down with it. "Get set, fellas," he called cheerfully. Bond put his head back under the surface. Everything was as before in the little community. And then, with stupefying suddenness, everyone went mad. Several fish looped the loop, then fell like heavy leaves to the sand. The moray eel came slowly out of the hole, stood upright on its tail, and gently toppled sideways. Then into the arena drifted the corpses from upstream, white-bellied fish, shrimps, langoustes of all sizes. As if blown by some light breeze of death, the clumsy bodies, their colours already fading, swept slowly past. Downreef there were splashes as still bigger fish tried to make it for safety. Bond felt a touch on his shoulder. Mr. Crest's eyes were bloodshot. He had put white sunburn paste on his lips. "Where in hell's our goddamn fish?" Bond lifted his mask. "Looks as if it managed to get away just before the stuff came down. I'm still washing for it." He got his head quickly under water again. Surely the stuff had passed by now. Surely the area was safe, just in case the fish, his fish because he had saved it, came back again. He stiffened. In the far mists there was a pink flash. Idly the Hildebrandt Rarity swam towards him. Not caring about Mr. Crest, Bond raised his free hand out of the water and brought it down with a sharp slap. Still the fish came. Bond shifted the safe on his harpoon gun and fired it in the direction of the fish. No effect. Bond put his feet down and began to walk towards the fish through the scattering of corpses. The beautiful red and black fish seemed to pause and quiver. Then it shot straight through the water towards Bond and dived to the sand at his feet and lay still. Bond only had to bend to pick it up. It just filled Bond's hand, lightly pricking the palm with the spiny black dorsal fin. When Bond got to Mr. Crest, he said, "Here," and handed him the small fish. Then he swam away towards the shore. That evening, with the Wave Crest heading for home, Mr. Crest gave orders for what he called a wingding. "Gotta celebrate, Liz. Cleaned up the last target and we can get the hell out of these goddamn Seychelles and back to civilization." He squeezed her chin and cheeks in his big hand and made the pale lips pout. He kissed them dryly. Bond watched the girl's eyes. They had shut tight. Mr. Crest let go. Her face was still white with his finger marks. "Gee, Milt," she said, half laughing, "you nearly squashed me. But do let's celebrate. What shall I order for dinner?" "Hell, caviar, of course." Mr. Crest held his hands apart. "One of those 2-pound tins. And that pink champagne." He turned to Bond. "That suit you, fella?" "Sounds like a square meal." Bond changed the subject. "What have you done with the prize?" "Formalin? Up on the boat deck with some other jars and stuff. All safe in our home morgue. I've already radioed the Smithsonian and the news agencies. My accountants will sure be glad of some fresh cuttings to show those darn revenue boys." Mr. Crest got very drunk that night. It did not show greatly. The soft Bogart voice became softer and slower, and one glass was swept off the table. But it showed in the things Mr. Crest said. There was a pathological desire to wound, quite near the surface, in the man. The first target was James Bond. He was treated to an explanation as to why Europe, with England and France in the van, was a rapidly diminishing asset to the world. Nowadays, said Mr. Crest, there were only 3 powers, America, Russia, and China. That was the big poker game. Occasionally some little country like England would be lent some money so they could take a hand with the grown-ups. Bond said, "Your argument reminds me of a rather sharp aphorism I once heard, to the effect that America has progressed from infancy to senility without having passed through a period of maturity." Mr. Crest's eyes hooded as they turned towards his wife. "Guess you kind of go along with that, eh, Treasure? I recall you saying once you reckoned there was something pretty childish about the Americans." "Oh, Milt." Liz Crest's eyes were anxious. "You know it was only something about the comic sections of the papers. Anyway, it was only a joke, wasn't it, James?" "That's right," said Bond, like when Mr. Crest said England had nothing but ruins and a queen. Mr. Crest's eyes were still on the girl. He said, "Shucks, Treasure. Course it was a joke. And one I'll remember, Treasure. One I'll sure remember." It looked to Bond as if, unless Mr. Crest passed out, the time was not far off when Bond would have to hit Mr. Crest just once very hard on the jaw. Fidel Barbet was now being given the treatment. "These islands of yours, Fido. When I first looked them up on the map, I thought it was just some specks of fly dirt on a page." Mr. Crest chuckled. "Even tried to brush 'em off with the back of my hand. Then I read a bit about them, and it seemed to me that my first thoughts had just about hit the nail on the head. I wonder why an intelligent guy like you doesn't get the hell out. Beachcombing ain't any kind of a life, though I did hear one of your family had logged over 100 illegitimate children. Maybe that's the attraction, eh, fella?" Fidel Barbet said equably, "That's my Uncle Gaston. The rest of the family doesn't approve. It's made quite a hole in the family fortune." "Family fortune, eh?" Mr. Crest winked at Bond. "What's it in? Cowrie shells?" "Not exactly." Fidel Barbet was not used to Mr. Crest's brand of rudeness. Copra's always been our main business. "Using the family bastards as labor, I guess. Good idea. Wish I could fix something like that in my old home circle." He looked across at his wife. Before the next jibe could be uttered, Bond had pushed his chair back and had gone out into the well deck. 10 minutes later, Bond heard feet coming down the ladder. It was Liz Crest. She said, "I thought I'd come and see you'd got everything you want. Are you sure you don't mind sleeping out here?" "I like it. It's rather wonderful to have all those stars to look at." She said eagerly, "You know, when I was young, I used to think the stars were really holes in the sky and that outside the universe was full of bright light." Bond said, "Where did you live then?" "At Ringwood in the New Forest. I'd like to go there again one day." Bond said, "You'd probably find it pretty dull." She reached out and touched his sleeve. "Please don't say that. You don't understand." There was an edge of desperation in the soft voice. "I can't bear to go on missing what other people have. Ordinary people, I mean." She laughed. "Just to talk like this for a few minutes is something I'd almost forgotten." She suddenly reached for his hand and held it hard. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to do that. Now I'll go to bed." The soft voice came from behind them. "Well, well, what do you know? Necking with the underwater help." Mr. Crest stood framed in the hatch. The cold, imprisoned breath of the saloon rushed out past him and chilled the warm night air. Bond said, "Don't jump to conclusions, Mr. Crest. You're lucky not to have got hurt so far tonight. You're drunk. Go to bed." "Oh-ho! Listen to the cheeky fella. Okay, so let's get some shut-eye." He turned to his wife and crooked a finger. "Move, Treasure." He stepped into the saloon and slid the door shut. God, what a man. Bond leant against the stern rail and watched the stars and set about washing his mind clear. Half an hour later, he was making a bed for himself among the Dunlopillo cushions when he heard a single, heart-rending scream. It tore briefly into the night and was smothered. Bond ran through the saloon and down the passage. With his hand on the stateroom door, he stopped. Hell, they were man and wife. If she was prepared to stand this sort of thing, it was no good Bond playing Sir Galahad. Bond walked back down the passage. As he was crossing the saloon, the scream rang out again. Bond cursed fluently and went out and lay down on his bed. How could a girl have so little guts? An hour later, Bond had reached the edge of unconsciousness when, up above him on the boat deck, Mr. Crest began to snore. On the second night out, Mr. Crest had gone up to the hammock that was kept slung for him between the speedboat and the dinghy. But that night he had not snored. This was too damned much. Bond got to his feet and was gathering up his shirt and shorts when, from up on the boat deck, there came a heavy crash. The crash was immediately followed by scrabbling sounds and a dreadful choking and gurgling. Had Mr. Crest fallen out of his hammock? Reluctantly, Bond climbed the ladder. As his eyes came level with the boat deck, the choking stopped. Instead, there was another, a more dreadful sound, the quick drumming of heels. Bond ran towards the figure lying spread-eagled in the bright moonlight. He knelt down, aghast. The horror of the strangled face was bad enough, but it was not Mr. Crest's tongue that protruded from his gaping mouth. It was the tail of a fish. The colours were pink and black. It was the Hildebrandt Rarity. The man was dead, horribly dead. When the fish had been crammed into his mouth, he must have reached up and desperately tried to tug it out, but the spines of the dorsal and anal fins had caught inside the cheeks, and some of the spiny tips now protruded through the blood-flecked skin round the obscene mouth. Bond shuddered. Death must have come inside a minute. But what a minute! Bond walked over to the racks of glass specimen jars. The plastic cover of the end jar lay on the deck beside it. Bond wiped it carefully on the tarpaulin, and then, holding it by the tips of his fingernails, laid it loosely back over the mouth of the jar. He went back and stood over the corpse. Which of the two had done this? There was a touch of fiendish spite in using the treasured prize as a weapon. That suggested the woman. She certainly had her reasons. But Fidel Barbet would have had the macabre humour. If, after Bond had left the saloon, Mr. Crest had needled the Seychellois just a little bit further, Fidel Barbet would not have hit him then and there. He would have waited and plotted. Whichever had done it had not thought of the consequences, of the inevitable inquest, perhaps of a trial. They were certainly all going to be in one hell of a mess unless he could tidy things up. Bond glanced over the edge of the boat deck. Supposing the hammock had broken, and Mr. Crest had fallen and rolled, could he have reached the sea? Hardly in this dead calm. But that was what he was going to have done. Bond got moving. With a table knife from the saloon, he frayed and then broke one of the main cords of the hammock, so that the hammock trailed realistically on the deck. Next, with a damp cloth, he cleaned up the specks of blood on the woodwork and the drops of formalin that led from the specimen jar. Then came the hardest part, handling the corpse. Carefully, Bond pulled it to the very edge of the deck, and himself went down the ladder and, bracing himself, reached up. The corpse came down on top of him in a heavy, drunken embrace. Bond staggered under it to the low rail and eased it over. There was a last, hideous glimpse of the obscenely bulging face, a sickening fume of stale whiskey, a heavy splash, and it was gone and rolling sluggishly away in the waves of the wake. Bond sighed deeply. He would be a very troublesome coroner who brought in anything but misadventure. He went back to the boat deck, gave it a final look over, disposed of the knife and the wet cloth, and went down the ladder to his bed. Bond was asleep inside 10 minutes. They made North Point by 6 o'clock that evening. The two men, with the woman between them, stood at the rail. Liz Crest was wearing a white linen frock with a black belt and a black and white handkerchief round her neck. The mourning colours went well with the golden skin. The three people stood stiffly and rather self-consciously, each one nursing his own piece of secret knowledge. That morning there had seemed to be a conspiracy among the three to sleep late. Even Bond had not been awakened by the sun until 10 o'clock. He showered in the crew's quarters and chatted with the helmsman before going below to see what had happened to Fidel Barbet. He was still in bed. He couldn't remember much except that he seemed to recall Mr. Crest being very rude to him. "You remember what I said about him, James? A grand slam redoubled in bastards. One of these days someone's going to shut up that ugly mouth of his forever." Inconclusive. Bond had fixed himself some breakfast in the galley and was eating it there when Liz Crest had come in to do the same. She was dressed in a pale blue shantung kimono to her knees. There were dark rings under her eyes, but she seemed perfectly calm. She whispered conspiratorially, "I do apologize about last night. Do forgive Milt. It's only when he's had a bit too much that he gets sort of difficult. He's always sorry the next morning, you'll see." When 11 o'clock came, Bond decided to force the pace. He looked very hard at Liz Crest, who was lying in the well deck reading a magazine. "Where's your husband? Still sleeping it off?" She frowned. "I suppose so. He went up to his hammock." Fidel Barbet had a line out for amberjack. Without looking round, he said, "He's probably in the pilot-house." Bond said, "If he's still asleep on the boat deck, he'll be getting a hell of a sunburn." Liz Crest said, "Oh, poor Milt, I hadn't thought of that. I'll go and see." She climbed the ladder. When her head was above the level of the boat deck, she stopped. "Jim? He's not here. And the hammock's broken." Bond said, "Fidel's probably right. I'll have a look forward." He went to the pilot-house. "Anyone seen Mr. Crest?" "No, sir. Why? Is anything wrong?" When the inevitable conclusion had been reached, Liz Crest had a short but credible fit of hysterics. Bond took her to her cabin. "It's all right, Liz," he said. "I'll look after everything. We'll have to radio Port Victoria. I'm afraid it's hopeless turning back. Anything like 6 hours in these seas is just not on." She stared at him, her eyes wide. You mean sharks and things?" Bond nodded. "Oh, Milt. Poor darling Milt." Bond went out and softly shut the door. The yacht rounded Cannon Point and reduced speed. Bond saw the customs and immigration launch move off to meet them. Liz Crest turned to him. "I'm beginning to get nervous." Fidel Barbet said, "Don't worry. All these people are my friends, and the Chief Justice is my uncle. They'll probably have the inquest tomorrow. You'll be able to leave the day after." "You really think so?" A dew of sweat had sprung below her eyes. "The trouble is, I don't really know where to leave for. I suppose—" She hesitated, not looking at Bond. "I suppose, James, you wouldn't like to come on to Mombasa. I mean, you're going there anyway, and I'd be able to get you there a day earlier than this ship of yours." Bond lit a cigarette. 4 days in a beautiful yacht with this girl. But the tail of that fish sticking out of the mouth, had she done it? Or had Fidel, who would know that his uncles and cousins would see that he came to no harm? Bond said, "That's terribly nice of you, Liz. I'd love to come." Fidel Barbet chuckled. "Bravo, my friend. I would love to be in your shoes, but for one thing. That damned fish. I like to think of you both being deluged with cables from the Smithsonian about it. Don't forget that you are now both trustees of a scientific Koh-i-Noor." Bond's eyes were hard as flint as he watched the girl. Surely that put the finger on her. He would make some excuse, get out of the trip. There had been something about that particular way of killing a man. But the beautiful, candid eyes did not flicker. She said, easily, charmingly, "That won't be a problem. I've decided to give it to the British Museum." James Bond noticed that the sweat dew had now gathered at her temples, but, after all, it was a desperately hot evening. The thud of the engines stopped, and the anchor chain roared down into the quiet bay.